James and Ruth David's house. Ruth was actually an adopted sister of Chester, and so Ruth and James came up here when Chester and his other family came up here. This home was not on this location. It was over by their homestead. Their homestead is over by the cemetery. And so they wanted this home to be on our foundation property because Ruth and James were just loved by everyone. And so they actually would take the logs and they numbered them like E1, E2, this would be the east wall, and then they took the home down. And they brought them, and the logs kind of sat here on the ground for maybe 2 years. Well, some of those marks washed off. And when they got ready to put this back together, it was really a challenge because these logs only fit where they were cut to fit. And so it was a challenge, but they did a beautiful job. The original cabin just had the one room and the dirt roof and the dirt floor. And then James built on the other 2 rooms. So this is where they lived with James and Ruth and 4 children. And so when we go inside, you'll see the dirt floor, and the sod roofs did leak. When it rained too much, they would drip mud all over everything, or when the snow melted in the winter, and there's a lot of snow here, those roofs would leak. But it was better than nothing, and they're really quite good insulation. So this would have been the bathtub. This is the bathtub. This would have been the laundry rinse tubs later on. These are a little bit newer than 1880. So as you walk into this beautiful little log cabin, you can just feel a spirit of peace in here. And I think it's because of this wonderful woman and man that lived in this home. They were loved by everyone. As you can see, Ruth was a full-blooded Native American. The story of her adoption comes when Anson Call was in Fillmore, Utah, and one night a knock came on his door, and he went to the door, and here stood an Indian man with a little baby wrapped in a buffalo robe and a 4-year-old boy. And he said, "I want to trade these children for flour." And Anson's wife was in the corner over there, and she said, "We don't have enough flour." But then she thought of the massacres that had taken place. And so they gave him flour, and he handed Anson this little girl. She was a 1.5 years old. And then he was just going, he said, "You take little squaw, give me flour." And so he gave the baby to Anson, and then he pushed the little boy forward, and he said, "Take the boy too." And so Anson actually took these 2 Indian children and adopted them. And Ruth was raised in an LDS family and was raised to play the organ. She became a midwife at 15, and she delivered hundreds of babies. She also was a loving, kind woman and loved to cook, and so she made treats for the children. Well, James, her husband, comes in with Johnston's army that had been sent by President Buchanan to put down the Mormon rebellion, which was misinformation that he had received. And so James comes into town and he goes, "You know, I really don't like the way they're treating these Mormons." And so he actually deserts and leaves the army, changes his name, and goes to work for Anson Call. Well, by this time, Ruth is 14 or 15 years old, and he falls in love with her. And he goes to Anson and he asks to marry her, and Anson said, "On one condition, that you won't ever take her away from us." And he said, "I won't." And so they were married and came up here in 1881 with their family. They had 10 children, but only 6 of them lived. So these are their 6 children. These 4 children would have come up here with them. Little Annie would have been 6 months old. So you can imagine, now we only have the 1 room built at that time, not this room. So we only have the room with the dirt floor. So we'll go in there. Can you imagine taking your baby, putting her on the dirt floor, and teaching her to crawl? That would have been a real challenge. So this is the 1 room where all 6 of them would have been. There would have probably been a bed in the corner, and maybe they had some bedrolls that went on the floor. In this little home, you'll see that we have a little salt cellar. They didn't have salt shakers, And we have the little salt spoon. So you could see how that worked. It's a beautiful little silver spoon. Over here, up on this wall, is a fire extinguisher. It looks like a bulb, a light bulb, but behind it is a spring. And when it gets hot, whatever's holding that spring, it melts. And the spring pierces that bulb. Inside that bulb is a chemical called carbon tetrachloride. And what that does is it comes and fills into the room, and it sucks out all the oxygen. So it smothers the fire that way, because these little cabins were just tinder boxes. So over here, this is the flower bin. This is when the kids would come from the amusement hall. They had a dance every Saturday night. And when the kids would come from the amusement hall, they'd lift this lid up to see what Aunt Ruth had made them. And she loved to make donuts. And so the kids would come and they would have donuts. They'd have cookies and pies. Everybody loved Aunt Ruth. Up here, you'll see a can of Rex lye. That's to make lye soap. First, you have to go out and kill the pig. Then you clean it, take all the fat off, and you put it in the oven, and you render it. And it stinks, because my mother used to render fat. And then you take that fat, mix it with the lye and some water, and cook it, and it makes the soap that you need. And so that's the kind of things that they had to do. So this is just what the typical family would have lived in this little log cabin.
Slugs. Why are there slugs? I don't understand. Do you know what a slug is, by the way? Slug is